Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to log into this webinar by the Kent State University Center for Corporate and Professional Development on the topic of using DiSC for keys to improve communication. We have over 100 registered participants, so in order to keep things moving and ensure that everyone can hear the presentation, we have muted everyone's phones. As a result, we ask that you use the chat function on the right of your screen to submit questions and comments. Please direct your chat to the host only, as I will monitor those and pass them along to the facilitator as time permits. Please do not use the raise your hand function, as we will not be using that function for this webinar. Quick reminder up front, if you have to leave prior to the end, I would like to encourage you to fill out the survey upon conclusion of the webinar, as your feedback will help us improve the experience and continue to provide a positive learning environment. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Ned Parks, Kent State facilitator, who will be directing us in the program today. Good morning, Ned.
Good morning, Greg. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much, and welcome everyone that's here. I'm really excited that we have 100 people sign up for this. This is awesome. And please, at any moment that you have a question, please chat your questions into Greg. He'll be able to pass them on to me, and we'll manage as many of those as we can. The more the merrier is fine, and if I don't get to all of them within the context of the webinar, we'll figure out a way to get some answers back to you one way or the other. So today we're going to talk about DiSC and how to use the DiSC assessment and what it is a little bit, and how to actually use it and put it to use to improve communications, not only at work, but anywhere, really. It doesn't matter. Anytime I'm communicating with somebody, the better I understand their needs and understand how to read how they're communicating with me, the better I can adapt and flex to their needs and to have a better line of communication. So appreciate it. I'm Ned Parks. I'm a Kent State facilitator, have been for 10 plus years, I believe. I think that's accurate. Gregg is in the Center for Corporate and Professional Development. Gregg is our host today. And again, if you have any questions, please chat them into Gregg, and then he'll just interrupt me and get them over to me, and I'll be able to try to get them answered as quickly as possible. So let me just dive right into this. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about some assessment basics. Let's just first get our head wrapped around assessments in general. So the study, the field of psychological assessing or any kind of assessing at all is called psychometrics. It's a big fancy word. And basically what's happening there is the field is bringing together the discipline of psychology and the discipline of statistics. A psychometrician is actually usually a psychologist with special qualifications, although not always. Oftentimes I've met psychometricians who have their doctorate in statistics and their master's in psychology. Most of them have their doctorate in psychology and a master's in statistics. I personally don't understand people that can do all that academics, and I envy them, but I'm also amazed at what they're able to accomplish. Basically, the whole field of study is how do we measure how you think? And how do we measure it in a way that we can use numbers to back it up so it's not fuzzy measurement, but it's hard measurement. And you really use math. I mean, really, behind every good assessment is a boatload of math, statistics, algorithms, and that's where the two blend together. They've been around a long, long time. In fact, the whole idea of certainly the psychological assessment itself, or the psychological behavior or your personality traits, they trace their roots. The personality traits trace their roots all the way back to Hippocrates, so several thousand years. And while he was very right in one fashion of the fact that we have 4 basic different personality traits, and I'll call them traits, he was wrong in where they came from. We've since learned through science that they come from a different place. The other thing to keep in mind is there's literally tens of thousands of assessments that have been developed, and each one of them has their own purpose. And this is something I will tell you to be very, very cautious of, when you're selecting an assessment. Here's how I like to look at it. An assessment's like a tool in a toolbox. And if I'm installing a window pane, probably the best tool to get out is not a hammer. There's probably other tools. There's putty knives and there's screwdrivers and there's other things to put the sealant in, a caulking gun, and so on and so forth. And oftentimes what I see is people use a really great, qualified, reliable, and valid assessment, and they're using it for the wrong purpose. So as you select any assessment, pre-hire assessment, aptitude, skill assessment, interest assessment, personality traits, whatever it is you're going after, make sure you're getting the right assessment and utilizing it in the right way. Many assessments have been misused. I see it all the time, and it just makes me cringe because it's a really good assessment and we're not using it properly, so we're not getting the full benefit out of it. So that's the one thing I will tell you to be very, very careful of in whether you're doing this professionally or personally, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you're getting the right assessment for the right job, and that's really, really important. So on that note, I get asked this a lot of times. Gee, can I use DiSC as a pre-hire assessment? The answer is no. You may not use DiSC as a pre-hire assessment. It wasn't designed for that, I won't help you do it. I will point you in another direction, but it's not ever to be used for that. So let's talk a little bit about what DiSC is and what it is not. It is an ipsative assessment. Now what that means is that ipsative is kind of an odd word that basically says it's a self-scoring assessment and we're not measuring you against anything else. Okay? So we're not norming you against some other activity or competency. It's just self-assessed, and it's just going to tell you based upon your answers where your behavioral and psychological assessment falls. It is a psychological assessment, and it very specifically measures both communicative styles and behavior styles. That's the short answer to what it is. What is it not? It's not a normative assessment. Normative is actually assessment that will measure you against other known items, like a pre-hire assessment would, or a skill assessment. There's no math involved, so I can't tell if you're good at math or bad at math by taking the DiSC. That would be a normative where we would measure you against known answers or known quantities, and it does not measure skills, aptitude, or intelligence. That is what the DiSC is not intended for that, and it does not. So it's important to understand what it is and what it is not. All right, let's move on. There we go. Okay, so the question that gets asked a lot, and I'll just go ahead and answer it right now because some of you are thinking it and you're not sure you want to ask it. Why is the D smaller case I? This is actually kind of an interesting little thing, but also quite important to know. So the original DiSC was, the theory of the DiSC was invented by a psychologist from Harvard by the name of William Marston. And Bill Marston developed it back in 1928. It then obviously moved into what we have today, which is computers and so on and so forth. But through that time period, a lot of people began to use the DISC, and so nobody has a total copyright on developing an assessment and calling it DiSC. So it's in the public domain is what I'm trying to tell you. And in order to separate that from an identification standpoint, the only way that Wiley could get a trademark on this was by lowercasing the I, and then the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office said it's different. And so the reason I tell you that is because oftentimes people say, I've taken the DiSC, and I'll ask them, which DiSC did you take? And they'll say, well, there's only one DiSC. No, there's probably 50 at least. and people have developed it and used the terminology. They even use the same colors. They make it look a lot alike, but that's just to get around the copyright laws. So I would always tell you that, or I ask clients all the time, does your disc have a small case I? Yes or no? No. Well, then I don't know which one you took. Doesn't mean you can't work with it. It just means I don't know. So the circumplex is really where everything happens after you take the assessment. So we kind of live inside the circumplex, which is what you're looking at right now. And the circumplex has 8 priorities around it. As you see those 8 words: action, enthusiasm, collaboration, support, stability, accuracy, challenge, and results. And it has 4 basic areas. The D stands for dominance. The I stands for influence. The S stands for steadiness, and the C stands for conscientiousness. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about those as we go on. But we're going to kind of live in this area and understand a little bit better what it really means and how to utilize that. So after someone takes the assessment, what you have in front of you is a sample results. So let me kind of explain it. The dot is where this person's DiSC assessment came out. They're an I. They're an I, and they are probably actually an IS, I would say. And what we've done, and it doesn't necessarily show it here, but we've taken each of the 4 areas and we've divided them into 3 sub-areas. So you would have I, IS, or ID. You would have S, SI, or SC, and so on around. This person is probably right on the line, since we don't have the lines there. They're probably going to come out an IS, which means that they pick up a lot of the characteristics of the S along with their primary characteristic of the I. You'll also notice that 4 of the priorities are now in bold and 4 of them are subdued. Everyone that takes the assessment winds up with 3 basic priorities. The 3 that are closest to the dot. So in this instance, it's action, enthusiasm, and collaboration. About 30% of the folks that take it wind up with a 4th priority, which is the sample that you see here, and that's illustrated by the accuracy, the hash marks shading going down to accuracy, as well as the word accuracy is being highlighted, or in bold, pardon me. And then about 8% of the population that take the instrument have a 5th priority. So they'll have, so we could have any one of the other 4 could also be highlighted. I've shown you one where someone has 4. So this is pretty, would represent about 30% of the population that takes it. And the rest, the 70%, have just 3, and they don't have the additional shaded, or striped shading, I should say. The other way that we read this is we see that their dot is pretty far in from the outside. So you have completely out on the edge, partway in, and then very close to the center. So what you end up with is this individual is probably slightly inclined to the characteristics of the eye. If the dot was completely on the outside of the ring, they would be strongly inclined, and if it was midway, they would be moderately inclined. The other thing to take note, and this is important to understand, everybody that takes it, everyone, all of us, we all have characteristics of all 4. So I'll have a lot of times people say, it says, yeah, but as I'm reading this, there's things I read over there that, that's kind of me some of the time, and that's me some of the time. And that's absolutely true. I jokingly like to say, if you didn't have elements, or if you had one of the areas that wasn't shaded at all, we'd get you to see Dr. Phil in a pharmacy right away. So everybody has some shading in all 4 areas. It just depends on how much they have and how much of those characteristics they actually pick up. The other thing to keep in mind is for this individual that we're looking at, stretching from where they are all the way over to challenging an idea. It's not that they can't do it, because it is still there even though it is subdued. It's not that they can't do it, it's that that'll be a larger stretch for them to do it. So if they're on my team and I am watching them in a meeting, as an example, and I can tell by their body language or their facial expressions that they're not comfortable with this, then I'm going to bring them out and say, are you sure you're okay with this? Well, you know, I don't know. Where somebody that had a dot clear on the left-hand side would probably be a lot more comfortable challenging my idea and saying, you know, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this. So this is one small way we can begin to read others and kind of help them, bring them into the conversation.
Ned, if I could interject.
Yeah. Sure.
We had a question come in wondering if there is any sort of gender trends that you've seen amongst the 4 styles. Is there some that tend to have more male or female people fall into that category?
It's an outstanding question, and it's asked frequently. The answer is no. So from a demographic standpoint, the distribution among all 4 is, in the world of statistics and psychometrics, considered equal. So let me define equal to you, because I don't want you to walk away thinking, oh, it's exactly 25 in all 4, that would be equal. In this measurement system, any shift of less than 3% and randomly less than 3% is considered an equal distribution. So here's my illustration. Let's say that we had 100 people and we had a mix of men and women and African Americans and whites and people from New York and Texas and Canada and maybe some folks from Europe in there as well. The distribution would be no greater than 25% in any of the 1, if that's the only demographics we had. I said that wrong. They would be no different than 3% difference between the 4. That's how I should say it. And then the next 100 people with the same demographic mix would be off, but they would be off differently. So you might have 28% of them were eyes in the first group and 23% were eyes in the second group. And we can't predict that. So let me be even a little more detailed in the question. Between genders, is there a predictable differentiation between the 4? No. Between ages? No. Between geographic cultures? No. Between religions? No. In other words, there's no demographic marker that we would use to say a preponderance of those people will wind up in one of the 4 categories. The only place that they have found, and this is in very large numbers, a shift or a loading in one area or the other is with occupations. So as an example, if I were to go in and do the DiSC in a group that was an advertising firm with a bunch of marketers and advertisers and salespeople in there, a preponderance of those people in that office, not all of them, but a preponderance would be eyes, because that's where we find that. If I was to do this in a police department, the policemen that were in the PR department or in recruiting other officers that would raise their hand and say, I would find that to be an interesting task. They would probably be eyes. That would be my suspect. In a law office, the lawyer that raises their hand and says, I'll be the spokesperson for the client and go out to the news media, they would probably be an eye. In a healthcare environment, and I've done a lot of work with skilled nursing, and what's fascinating is the nurses that work second shift, specifically in skilled nursing, but I've also seen it in hospitals, are generally eyes, or at least they thrive in the environment. And the reason they do is because that's when everybody comes to visit, and there's a lot more people to interact with, and that's very typical of the characteristics of an eye. You'll find a lot of your science, math, detail folks would be C's. Architects, engineers, chemists, tax folks, anybody that would work in those sorts of fields, we tend to find a lot of C's down there. We find a lot of folks over in the S category that work in what I call caring fields: therapists, counselor workers, psychologists, social workers, kindergarten teachers, palliative and hospice care, pediatric care in the healthcare environment. Your family attorneys tend to be a lot of S's. not divorce attorneys. They tend to be mostly deeds. Family attorneys also do divorce work, but then they do, oh my gosh, elder law, guardian ad litem for children, wills, estates, real estate law to help someone buy a house. A friend of mine is a family attorney, and she says, I do caring law, and I thought that was a great way to describe it. And most of her colleagues fall into the S category. The D category, you would find a lot of folks in the emergency room, the SWAT team, litigators, anybody that's in it they would thrive. You would find them thriving in this environment. I didn't say that their skill level was that good because this doesn't test that, but I do say that they thrive and they seek it out. Anybody that's in a fast-paced job where they have to make quick decisions and move on to the next thing, where they have to make decisions and they don't have all the information, these are comfortable in that environment. Now, they might not be any good at it. They might not have the skill set. They might not be any good at whatever job they have, but they would thrive in the environment that that job would provide. And that's the differentiation I want to make sure that people understand. It's a great question. So yeah, there's nothing. Oh, the other question we get a lot, Greg, is does it change over time? Oh, come on, Ned. My DOT's going to be different than what it was when it was 18. I hear that literally every day I do this. And the answer is the overwhelming amount of research, and it's overwhelming, says no, it's not. That your DOT was neurologically wired in the brain in the womb. And the amount of people that have a significant change in the location of the DOT, significant, is a very, very, very small percentage. Very small percentage. Now, what is important to understand, while my DOT hasn't changed, that doesn't mean you haven't. You've grown up, you've learned new things, you've made a mistake, and you said, wow, I'm not going to do that again. You've had some success, and you say, oh, I am going to do that again. You've matured, you've had experiences, you have learned to flex and adapt to your work environment, to the culture of where you're working. And so I would hope that you have changed. I would hope that we all have changed. You be glad that I'm not like what I was when I was 18, or I probably wouldn't be on this call right now. And I think a lot of us can say similar kind of things. I'm delighted that I've learned things and I've grown and I've changed how I approach things. That doesn't mean my DOT has changed. Here's the two words I really want you to hold on to: flexibility and adaptability. Those are the two. I understand who I am. I understand what strength that brings me. I understand how to utilize that, and I understand how to shape it and change it when I need to. When is it good to utilize that, and when is it not good to utilize that? So, yeah, it does not change. The DOT stays the same. They've done research where they have given this over and over and over again to the same people at regular intervals, and then they interview them, and they find out that they've had children, and they've done all sorts of different things, they don't change. It doesn't matter. Loss of a job, gain of a job, divorce, marriage, children, you name it. New degrees, doesn't matter. The DOT is where the DOT is. Have they grown personally as an individual? They absolutely have. Great question. Thanks for sharing it, Greg. Appreciate it. Okay, move on. This is, what you're looking at right here is page 2 of every single DiSC assessment that someone takes. And it's important because it just gives us an introduction to what the instrument really is. I'd like to point out just a couple of things. If you look in the upper right-hand corner in the blue box, we have 5 cornerstones of the DiSC. And the first one, I think, is really important to understand that all of our styles are equally as important as everybody else's style. There isn't a good or a bad. There's no pass or fail. That's not what these are intended to do, and in fact, they do not do it. You know, is your work influenced by other factors? I just talked about that. They certainly are or should be. I would hope that you are connected enough, I should say, to what you're doing to make sure that you make adjustments and flex and adapt. The third one down, I think, is incredibly important for all leaders. The one constant I find in all leaders, just about everywhere, and that is while they may have very different leadership styles, they all understand themselves and they're pretty aware of who they are. They're aware of what they need to do to change, to be better. They're aware of where they put people off and where they pull people in. And so the DiSC helps people understand themselves and is one more step that way. And then the rest, the last two kind of touch on similar topics. And that is the better I understand the people I work around, live around, and interact with, the better it is for me to interact with them. So I'll give you a quick illustration of this. I'm a high I. In fact, if you look, my dot is right on the line, just under the N in the word action. And I have three priorities, which is enthusiasm, action, results. My wife is about midway between the two C's in the word accuracy, and she's on the line down there. So we're pretty opposite. And years ago, we had a rental property, and I decided to sell it. And we did. We sold it, and it had been paid off. So she said, I mean, what are we going to do with the money? And I said, well, we're going to put some money in each of the IRAs, and we're going to finish building the garage. We had been doing an addition to the house with a garage. I said, we're going to finish that off all in one fell swoop. And I said, the rest will go in our daughter's college account. How does that sound to you? And she said, oh, I like that. I think that's a good idea to do with all that money. And I let it go. For me, the verbal interaction was plenty. That's all I needed. For a C, that wasn't good enough. And that's not a criticism. About 3 days later, she asked me what we're going to do with the money, and I gave her the same answer. And she said, oh, that's right, that's good. About 2 days later, I got the same question. So what I did is I remembered I'm talking to a C. So I sat down to an Excel spreadsheet, and I put the sale price into the house. I put where the money was going to be dispersed. I ran it down to 0, and I handed it to her. She was fine. She didn't ask me again. In fact, as an experiment, when the money came in, I didn't tell her. I just went ahead and dispersed it, and she pulled in the driveway later, and all the lumber was there to finish the add-on that we were doing, and she said, oh, did the money come through? So she had been she was comfortable with it written down, where I was comfortable with it in writing. And hopefully some of you are kind of having a laugh right now, because maybe some of you have experienced those sorts of things either at home or at work. If you come down to the bottom of page 2, it's where we, again, we're introducing the DiSC. So we give dominance, which is the D, and the five, certainly not total, but 5 of the kind of the characteristics of the Ds: direct, results-oriented, firm, strong-willed, and forceful. We come over to the I's. In more of the red area, they're outgoing, they're influencers, they're outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, highly spirited, and lively. We come down to the S's for steadiness, and they're even-tempered, accommodating, patient, humble, and tactful. We come around to the C's, and we find that stands for conscientiousness, and they're much more analytical, reserved, precise, private, and very systematic. They are very comfortable working on their own. So let me kind of throw it out to the audience here, and we're going to ask you to do a little DiSC self-assessment. So just on your own, and if you're sitting there at your computer, or a couple of you are sitting there, is fine. Would you call yourself more active or more thoughtful? More active or more thoughtful? If you're more active, just take a piece of paper out and write an A down and kind of write it at the top part of the page. If you're more thoughtful, I want you to write a T down at the bottom, or you can spell out the whole word if you like. And you kind of put that at the bottom part of the page. So are you more active or are you more thoughtful? All right, we're going to go to the next one. Are you more questioning or are you more accepting? Are you more questioning of things that are brought your way, or are you more accepting of things that are brought your way? Now, keep in mind, many of you are going, well, then it would depend on the situation. Absolutely, I would hope so. That's where that flexibility and adaptability come. But on the larger scale, the big picture, are you more questioning or are you more accepting? What would your colleagues call you? What would your spouse call you? Your spouse might say, oh, she or he is pretty questioning, Everything's got to be looked at. It's detailed. And do you have it right? And, you know, I'm over here and I go, yeah, I kind of trusted the guy, you know, it sounds all right. So I'm a little more accepting. All right, so you can write down whichever one those happen to be. And then we're going to kind of look at all 4 of these together. Are you active? Are you thoughtful? Are you accepting? Or are you questioning? So if you're active in questioning, I'm going to wind up and say, well, you might be a D, or at least your dot might fall somewhere in that category. If you're active in accepting, we might say, you know, I think maybe you're an I. If you're thoughtful and accepting, an S, and if you're questioning and thoughtful, a C. So this is kind of how we put it together. This is the easiest way to read ourselves and to read others. You're interacting with somebody, you have a client on the phone, you have a vendor on the phone, you have an employee in your office, you have talking to somebody in a meeting, and these are the 4 words that I try to, when I read other people, these are the 4 words that I think about. And so the thoughtful side, let me give you an example of what that would sound like. It would sound like this. I would ask the person a question, and there would be a delay to the answer. Why? They're thinking out the answer before they answer it. If you ask me a question, I'm probably going to start answering it before you're done asking it. Why? Because I'm more active, and I'm more apt to get the answer out. If the question brings up something and we're debating whether it's accurate or not, I'm going to say, well, I think it's probably okay. If that person's more accepting, they're probably on the right-hand side. The more questioning, they're over on the left-hand side.
Ned?
Yes, sir.
We have a question came in. Would like you to go into a little bit more detail of the definition as you're using it for active, thoughtful, questioning, accepting.
Sure. A great question. Thank you. So an active individual would be something that would be a lot more social, a lot more talkative. They actually seek out a lot of activity, a lot of action. Maybe I can, it'll help if I go back a couple of slides to right here. So that active person would be at the top, and you can see what their priorities would be. Their priorities would be enthusiasm, action, results. If they were more thoughtful, if you look down to the bottom, you would see priorities that would be much more in line with supportive of others, stability in their world, and accuracy. If you see somebody that's accepting, I would expect their priorities to be enthusiastic, collaborative, and supporting of others. And if you see them more questioning of the things going on, I would expect that their priorities would be more in the challenge area. They would question, they would challenge, they would doubt, they would make sure, they would want details. They would want them to be accurate, and we have the accuracy down there. And then they'd want to get moving. They would want to see results. So that is, that's how I would answer what really that means. I always come back to the circumflex. And if it's active, I'm thinking, oh, that's at the top. So I know I've got enthusiasm, I got results, and I got action. So just really kind of keep this simple. And if I've got a thoughtful person, you know, I'm going to see some supportive tendencies, some supportive activities. I'm going to see some need for stability, and I'm going to see a lot of desire for accuracy. If I've got somebody that's questioning everything, they want a lot of details, I'm going to combine that over on the challenge and the results side. And if I see somebody who goes, yep, it sounds pretty good to me, that's fine, I'm going to see them a lot more over towards the enthusiasm collaboration side. So here's a great example of this. I'm in the process right now of trying to buy a new car. So my research, what I use, now I keep in mind, I'm an I, and I'm right under the N in action, so my 3 are enthusiasm, action, results, okay? And I tend to have a lot of shading in the S area and not quite as much in the, well, very little in the C area. So what I use to use for research is consumer reports. Now, my wife says, and this is hysterical, how can you trust consumer reports? Well, she's over here on the C side, so she's a lot more questioning. And it's not that she doesn't trust consumer reports. She wants to know why I do. And that thought would never cross my mind. You know, they've been out there for years. They don't take money from manufacturers. When they test a car or a washing machine or whatever, they actually buy it with their own money. You know, I think that's pretty cool. They got a great reputation. They've got great history. So I'm good. I'm accepted. I'm good. I'm moving on. Well, how many other places are you going to do comparative research? None, because one is fine for me. Now, I guarantee you, with 100 people on the phone, Greg, some of the folks on the phone right now are pretty uncomfortable with what I just said, and others are going, well, heck yeah, why would you want more than that? So I hope that answered that question of the difference between the thoughtful, the questioning, the accepting, and the active. Always go back to the circumflex and look at those priorities, because you'll find that they connect with each other. Great question, thank you. If there's any others out there, don't hesitate to ask. So then we take a look at it, and again, when I combine active and questioning, I'm going to pretty much figure that person's a D. When I provide the questioning and thoughtful, I'm pretty much certain that they're going to be in the C category. Active and accepting, I'm seeing them in the I category, and thoughtful and questioning is C, and thoughtful and accepting is S. So any other questions out there, Greg, any have come in that we need to touch on?
There's another one that is wondering if someone can be all 4 styles.
So the answer to that is no. So I'll go back to, it's a great question. Let me go back to our circumflex here, and I'll go back to this one. As I said before, we do have characteristics of all 4, but your report would never, under any circumstances, say DIS and C. It would have the most of 2, primary and secondary. Now, let me talk a little bit about how we were able to measure this 4th priority of with the hashed area, wherever it happens to be. Our example is it happens to be the accuracy. About 8 years ago, we did not have the technology to be able to reliably measure that. We knew it existed. So 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I'd give a DiSC and someone would say, let's say it was this person here. Here's the conversation I would have. They'd go, yeah, this is pretty accurate, but man, I'm missing this thing on accuracy. I don't know why it's not there. And their colleagues would lean over and go, oh my gosh, yeah, this person is like, man, nothing gets by them. They're super detail oriented. Yeah, the other fits, but we're missing that. We knew it existed. They did not have a reliable and valid way to assess it until a thing called computer adaptive technology came along. So here's what happens in computer adaptive technology. And you've all experienced it, and you've all experienced it with Amazon. And so that you're all already going, oh, I think I know what it is. So here's what happens in the DiSC. When we send out the link for them to take the profile, they're given and this is a very layman's way to describe it. They're given a bucket of questions. Everyone gets the same bucket with the same questions. Everybody answered 79 questions, but not everybody answered the same 79. Here's what happened. As you're answering, the algorithm is asking itself, okay, who else answered the questions this way, and what kind of results did we get? And so this person here is answering away, and it answers the first batch of questions, and it keeps coming back to action, enthusiasm, collaboration, and then all of a sudden, they answer this question that suggests a high degree of accuracy. And the computer says, whoop, wait a minute, that's a little bit out of touch, that's not quite there, so let's test that theory. So they ask you another question, and to see, and it almost sounds like that one, to see if you come back and answer accuracy again. Now, I don't know the mathematical algorithm, but at some break point of the tiebreaker questions and the questions that they're asking, at some point mathematically it says, this person has a 4th priority of accuracy, or a 5th of whatever it would be. Now, this individual is an I. That's who they are. They're close enough to the S that they might be an IS. Doesn't really matter for our purposes here. Do they have some characteristics of the D? Sure do, and we see a pretty good amount of shading there. Do they have characteristics of the S? Yep, and they have a good amount of shading there. This individual happens to have the priority of accuracy as their 4th, so they pick up a lot of that. But there's still only one. We all have characteristics of all 4, but we're still only one as a primary and one as a secondary. So you'll never see a report that has more than 2 letters assigned to it. You will see reports that have 2 letters and then additional priorities if they happen to have those. And the priorities could have been anything. So this person could have had a priority of any one of the other 5 that are there that happen to be accuracy for them. It could have been support, it could have been results, it could have been challenge, it could have been stability. This particular person had the report of accuracy. Hope that answered the question sufficiently. Any others you have sitting in the queue, Greg, that we can take?
Not at the moment.
Okay, very good. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, and I want to make sure that I kind of reiterate it, because to me, it's just so gosh darn important. They're all equally valuable. This is not, by the way, this exercise I'm about to recommend you do is not a lot of fun, but it's very revealing. If I were to have you take and timeline your life, and in that timeline, I would say, I want you to mark down in your timeline mistakes that you've made in your life. Everybody kind of rolls their eyes and goes, oh, I don't want to do that. Well, I can understand that. However, the second thing, after you have it all timelined out, that I have you do is go back and look at them. And I have you look and say, which of these mistakes did you make in a vacuum? In other words, which of these mistakes did you make without the benefit of somebody questioning you? Which of these mistakes did you make surrounding yourself with people that only agreed with you? Which of these mistakes did you make without consulting anyone? And generally speaking, I know when I do it for myself, probably 95 of my mistakes, 95% of them are, I did not have the benefit of someone saying, you need to really think that through, and here's why. Now, if I hang around a bunch of eyes all the time, I'm going to be hanging around people that think and act just like me. And I'm not going to have the benefit of that challenge. And I think that that's very, very important. I think it's very important in business. I think that it's very important that we have that diversity of thought process. I think it's very important that we have one person at the table who's an action results oriented, come on, let's get it done, and somebody else is putting on the brakes going, slow down there, let's look at the data, let's understand how it's going to impact others. Let's make sure we really make sure that we're doing the right thing. I think those two vary what I call creative conflicts, and I think those are healthy. I think that we don't appreciate them enough. So I'm a huge proponent of the fact that they're all equally valuable because they bring something of value. If you go back to, I'll take you back to it again just to reiterate it, because like I said, we always go back to the circumflex. If you look at the 8 priorities, there's not a bad priority on there. I mean, if your child said, I want to challenge that, depending upon the situation, we'd say good. If your child said to you, I want to collaborate with my friends and build this as a team, you'd say good. If your child was excited about something, you'd say good. If your child was saying, gee, I want to make sure I get my homework right before I turn it in, we'd say good. And I can give you the same examples for a results-oriented support, stability, and action. So there's not a bad or a disruptive necessarily priority here. Can they sometimes not be used quite the way we want them? Yep, sure can. Are there times when one is a little better than the other? Yep, sure is. Does that mean that we shouldn't have them all at the table? No, it does not. I think we should have them all at the table. All right, so let me finish here. We can adapt to fit our styles to situations, environments. That's flexing and adapting, which I talked about earlier. So let's talk a little bit in the remaining time that we have here, about 11 minutes, of how to read other people. And this is very, very important. We can't walk up to everybody and say, hi, I'm Ned. I'm going to give you a DiSC so I know how to talk to you. I can do that in a team environment. It's great to do when we're working as a team and we say we want to do this, but I can't do it on a one-off basis. It's a bit off-putting and slightly odd, and let's just be clear about that. But I can teach you how to read others. So as we read others, the thing I want you to keep in mind is under no circumstances should we ever use this for labeling someone, but for understanding them. I also would tell you not to use yours as a crutch. So if Gregg were to ask me, now I need you to do this detailed work, I can't laugh at him and go, sorry, I'm an I don't do details. Well, yeah, in fact, I do. Is it a stretch for me? Sometimes. Can I do it skill-wise? I can, actually. I have the skill to do it. So it's not a skill question. Do I want to do it? Maybe not. Can I do a good job of it in small quantities? I actually can. First, just speaking very personally. Do I want to do it all day, every day? Oh, Lord, no. If Gregg said, I want you to do this all day, every day, I'd be looking for a new job. I don't know. I'm not going to do that. That's not who I am. I'm not comfortable. But that doesn't mean I'm going to use it as a crutch to get out of doing something. And Gregg shouldn't use it as a label saying, Ned can't do this, he's an I. That's short-circuiting me. And as leaders, we need to push people out of their comfort zones. They need to learn that they can do some different things and experience those. So part of that is just part of the growth process. There's no good or bad styles. All styles have strengths and limitations, and everyone is a blend of all four. So there's the answer to the other question that we were just asked. So here's how I read other people. I first just observe behavior because I can see it. It's simple. Body language, tone of voice and expression, their choice of words. I like to think of the DiSC as 4 different languages. I'll give you some examples of what that looks like in just a second. And then I ask these very simple questions. Does this person appear to be fast-paced and outspoken to me? Or are they more cautious and reflective? It's very simple. They're more one way than the other. Okay? They're more. I didn't say all one way. I didn't say they're all fast-paced and outspoken. They're more fast-paced than cautious and reflective. Does this person is a little more questioning and skeptical, or do they tend to lean in the direction of accepting and warm? Again, simple question to ask. And then we just put it together. In my example here, the individual was fast-paced and outspoken. They were accepting and warm, so we said, I think they're an I. They seem to also have this really accepting and warm thing, and they also showed me a little bit of cautious and reflective occasionally, so maybe they're an IS. They're kind of down that way towards the S. I will tell you that I don't get too wazzed out. I'm more interested in the top of the hemisphere, the bottom of the hemisphere, the left side, and the right side. And that's, it's great to have super good detail, but if I can get just that far, top and right, I'm in pretty good shape as far as, okay, I kind of can now predict what I'm going to get from this individual, and I have a pretty good idea of what they're going to give me back and how they're going to respond to whatever I say to them. So let's have a little fun. I'm going to give you just a minute to write these down. Do you think Jimmy Carter was fast-paced and outspoken, or was he more cautious and reflective? Do you think he was more questioning and skeptical, or accepting and warm? What about Ronald Reagan? Was he fast-paced and outspoken, or cautious and reflective? Was he questioning and skeptical, or was he accepting and warm? We'll ask the same thing of Bill Clinton, Jerry Ford, Richard Nixon, and Barack Obama. So I'll give you I'll give you a minute, maybe a minute and a half. We've got about 6 minutes and 45 seconds left, and we want to respect your time. So I'll give you about a minute and a half to kind of jot down your own personal notes of what you know about these 6 presidents, and then I will give you who I believe they are. I have not given them the DiSC, so I'm only going to give you what I think, and I'll give you my reasoning why. While you're doing that, Gregg, any questions so I don't miss out on any, or are we good?
No, we're still doing good, Ned. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Okay. So what does Ned think these folks are, and why does he think that? I think Jimmy Carter was very cautious and reflective. His speech pattern was a very measured speech pattern. He thought about words before they came out of his mouth. I think he's a very accepting and warm individual. I think he always was. Did that always serve him well? Nothing always serves anybody well, and nothing is always bad for the job that they're doing. So, we're not looking for perfection here. We're trying to understand who the individual is. I also think that Jimmy Carter was an incredibly detail-oriented individual. So where do I think Jimmy Carter comes out? I think he comes out CS and pretty far to the outside. So I think he's pretty much center at the bottom. Maybe he was an SC. It's hard to tell, and it kind of doesn't matter which one came first. But I would guess him to be an SC. He was, I believe that he graduated from Annapolis in nuclear engineering, a highly, scientific, tons of study, discipline, accuracy to get those sorts of grades, to make that, to get through that sort of work. So I tend to believe he's very, very far to the bottom and cautious and reflective. And I think he was more accepting and warm, although I would also say that he's probably got some C in there. So probably an SC. Ronnie Reagan, to me, an off-the-chart I. I don't think he's an ID. I don't think he's an IS, or was. I think he was very fast-paced and outspoken. I think he's very accepting and warm, made friends with everybody, even people that he disagreed with, worked very hard at that. He was a very likable guy, charismatic, very comfortable in the limelight, great sense of humor about himself, pretty typical of someone that's an extreme I. Bill Clinton, I would put his dot right smack next to Ronnie Reagan's. I think those two guys, other than their politics, were about as closely aligned from this perspective of any two people I think I've ever seen. I'm kind of a political junkie, so I like to read a lot about the presidents. I'm fascinated by what they do. Those two were actually very close personal friends in their, when Bill Clinton was the president and in their post-presidential lives, respectively, which doesn't surprise me any. I think there was a lot about them that were very much alike, and so I think Bill Clinton was an off-the-chart I. Jerry Ford, I think Jerry Ford was an S. I think he was a solid S. I don't think he was blended with anything else. He was very thoughtful, very cautious and reflective, a more measured speaking tone in both his speeches that he delivered as well as interviews that he did. He also basically toasted his own ability to get reelected when he gave Richard Nixon a pardon. And I think he was sincere when he said he did it because he thought the country needed to heal. That is a very supportive thing to do, and very, very what I call S-like. Richard Nixon, I think, was a D. I think he was a very, I don't know that he was as fast-paced as people might not call him fast-paced, but he was very outspoken, and he was very challenging and distrusting, but I don't know that that falls into this necessarily. He was very skeptical. Well, distrusting and skeptical certainly would. So I think he was a D, maybe a DC, kind of doesn't matter, but certainly in that area. And Barack Obama, I will tell you, I think is the hardest person of all to read of all the presidents. And this is where we get fooled a little bit by the ability of a skill ability, and we mix that up with their personality type. So many people, when I do this in a classroom setting, I have a classroom of 30, and they all pick, I can tell you that almost everybody gets Carter, Reagan, and Clinton spot on. Normally for Nixon, they're either DC or CD, so they're pretty close there. And with Barack Obama, they get it all over the board, and here's what I'll tell you. He was extremely cautious and reflective. I think he's accepting and warm, and he can be questioning and skeptical. I think he's far at the bottom, and I think he straddles the C and the S. I don't know which he is, but that's where I think the guy is. Now, the reason some people pick him as a C is because when he steps to the mic, he can be a very energetic, enthusiastic speaker. But that's a skill set that he turns on and he turns off. And I think when we read people, we have to make sure of that.
Ned, we have another question that's come in.
Sure. Yep.
You talked about some tendencies in terms of occupation that tends to fall in certain areas. The question is, if you've been trained in an area or been granted a degree and work in an area that doesn't necessarily match you as a person, are you doing yourself a disservice to stay in that field?
Well, that's a great question, Greg. Here's how I'll answer that. I have a very small little neighborhood accounting firm that does our taxes and accounting for us. And there's two women that are partners there. One's an I off the charts, and the other's a C off the charts. And years ago, I did some internal work with them and their bookkeepers and the rest of their team, and we did the DiSC for everybody. And the one partner came out the I, and the other came out the C. So in individual interviews, this was really eye-opening for me. I actually learned a lot from this that I've applied elsewhere. I asked the I accountant, explain to me what accounting is to you. What's the job? And she said, well, the job of an accountant is to go out, visit their clients, listen carefully to what she said, visit their clients and educate them as to what these numbers mean and how to utilize these numbers and do things different to get them where they want them. Well, I think that's an outstanding answer from an accountant. I couldn't find any fault with that at all. I asked her partner, who's the C. Oh, and she said, that's a simple to answer. She said, my job as an accountant is to make sure that all the numbers are accurate, that they're where they should be, and that the tax forms are filled out on time and accurately. Well, I don't have any issue with that answer either. So, Greg, to answer the question, and I hope that use that as an illustration, I will tell you that oftentimes there's a way to do my work, even though I might be, in an area that I'm around a lot of C's. Is there a way for me to do the work? Let's say I'm a degreed engineer and I'm around all these other C's, and my DiSC says I'm an I. Well, can I still be a good degreed engineer? I would tell you you can. My big question is, do you enjoy the work? That's the one thing I would ask. And is there a way that you can manipulate, and I mean this in a good way, manipulate your job so the I tendencies that you have and characteristics actually help you in that job? So I know a friend of mine who's a chemist. He's an I, and he's in chemical sales. He could not be happier. He could not be happier. He's out, he's meeting people all the time, he's playing golf with clients, he's got this personality that's larger than life, and boy, when he turns it on, he can sit there and talk chemistry with the best of them. So I do believe that we can find a home when these things apparently seem to be at opposite ends. I believe we can find that home. That's a great question. Okay, so our time is up. We want to respect your time. The last thing I'll give you, and this is the last slide anyway, or almost the last slide, is you can use this to just try to figure out the folks that you work with. The same thing we did with the presidents. You can do exactly the same thing. And then last but not least, I'll turn it over to Greg, and here's some contact information for us. So thank you everyone for being here and spending an hour with us today, and I hope you learned something new about not only the DiSC, but assessments in general. Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ned. Very great presentation. Really enjoyed that. Hope everybody else did as well. So thank you for attending. We hope it was a beneficial learning experience for you. You can see on the screen there, we have an upcoming open enrollment program that you can register for if you're interested in attending a full-day program with Ned. You also can contact our office if you'd like to learn more about our DiSC offerings as well as our other program offerings that we can deliver on site for your company. Our next webinar is scheduled for Monday, March 26th at 2 p.m. It will be a lean overview. We certainly hope you can join us again. Again, please remember to fill out the survey when exiting the webinar, and we hope you have a great weekend.